Wait just a second. Over the last 80 years, has autism really increased this much? Or are we finally looking in the right place? In this video, I'm promising two clear things. First, why labeling something like paracetamol as the cause is a weak argument, and second, what explains the biggest chunk of this apparent increase: changes in diagnostic criteria. And by the end, I'll leave you with an honest frame for the question, okay, then what about the rest? No panic when you see a graph. Let's first talk about what we're actually measuring. This matters, and the interesting part is coming now. First, let's calm down the paracetamol issue. What the research text says is pretty clear. There's no strong scientific reason to talk as if paracetamol use and autism have a meaningful, functional relationship. If anything, it falls into the weak association category. So saying this is the cause is an easy story to tell, but it's not solid enough for science to carry. Put simply, we don't owe molecules any loyalty. If something is problematic, it's problematic. If it isn't, it isn't. That's why following your doctor's guidance and using it, like any medication, at the lowest effective dose for the shortest necessary time is usually the most reasonable approach. The goal of this video isn't to tell anyone, do this. It's to talk about how to think and where to be cautious. So the question is, if there isn't a single culprit, why do the numbers look like they're going up? The real answer is coming. In the autism has increased story of the last 80 years, the biggest change is often not autism itself, but the definition of it. Think of a camera's resolution. When the resolution increases, you don't add new people to the scene. You simply start seeing details you couldn't pick up before. In the 1960s, autism wasn't even an official diagnosis the way we know it today, so it was often labeled with names like childhood schizophrenia or infantile psychosis, mostly diagnosed only in young children. And the criteria were so strict that a child often needed extremely severe speech difficulties, almost at the level of being non-verbal. When the definition is narrow, the visible number is narrow. Pause here. The next part is more striking. In the 1980s, DSM-3 introduced infantile autism as an official diagnosis for the first time. The scope became more structured, centered on social communication and language difficulties, along with repetitive behaviors. Then, with the DSM-3 revision in 1987, it wasn't just the most severe cases anymore. A wider group of children with stereotyped interests and behavior patterns were included in the definition. Let me say it more accurately. This isn't a sudden explosion. It's like putting more files into the same cabinet. The file count looks bigger because the labels change, and it accelerates from there. In the early 1990s, DSM-4 introduced an umbrella category like pervasive developmental disorders, with subtypes defined: autistic disorder, Asperger's disorder, childhood disintegrative disorder, Rett disorder, and PDD-NOS. Especially PDD-NOS, often used for milder or atypical profiles, significantly expanded who was captured in the broader autism-related diagnostic net. And with these distinctions, adults also began to be evaluated and diagnosed more often. Then, in 2013, DSM-5 consolidated these subtypes under a single label, autism spectrum disorder, because clinicians couldn't always reliably distinguish Asperger's from autistic disorder. It's like updating a dictionary. When the words change, the same lives can show up under a different heading. Now, let's get to the numbers. Here are the concrete figures. In Denmark, between 1980 to 1991, about 60% of the observed increase can be explained by diagnostic expansion alone. In the United States, for children ages 3 to 18, about 64.2% of the increase between 2000 to 2010 is also linked to diagnostic expansion. And for 15-year-olds, that figure rises to about 97%, almost all of it. In Sweden, roughly 30% of the increase between 1992 to 2014 is likewise attributed to diagnostic expansion. These don't explain all of the increase, but they very clearly show where the biggest piece is, and the proportions are honestly extraordinary. So before saying autism exploded, we need to remember how much the definition and the system have changed. So what's left? What explains the rest? Pay attention here, because we're going to be careful. The second major layer is increased awareness and reduced stigma. As teachers and parents have become less likely to treat the word autism as a taboo, as access to support services has expanded, and as clinical tools for both children and adults have improved, diagnosis has become more common and often more accurate. In the field, in classes, I see this. Something that used to get labeled as stubbornness can sometimes be a stress response to a disrupted routine. Let me give 3 concrete examples. First, in a physical education class, when a game rule changes at the last minute, a student suddenly withdraws. In that moment, it can look like they don't want to, but sometimes the real issue is the speed of change and uncertainty. Second, in a classroom under fluorescent lights, a student becomes completely scattered, then noticeably settles when active noise cancellation is turned on or when they move to a quieter corner. That's not being difficult. It can be a clue about sensory load. Now, pay attention. Third, someone flinches at that sharp, metallic school bell sound, covers their ears, and only then can they recover. Some things look small from the outside but feel huge on the inside. Wait a second. Saying these things is not the same as diagnosing anyone. It just reduces the risk of misreading people. Now let's talk about the risk of being misled. Because finding a single cause feels comforting, but what the research text underlines is clear. Diagnostic expansion does not explain the whole increase. The search for what explains the remaining part is still ongoing, and it's very likely there isn't one single final answer. And people who claim there is often sell you a neatly packaged story, like, "We found the culprit, case closed." It feels good, I get it, but the cost can be heavy. Families being misdirected, autistic people and their families being unnecessarily stigmatized, even cuts to the investments and services this field actually needs. Worse, especially during pregnancy, it could lead people to avoid medications that might genuinely be necessary, which can create real risks. And yes, sometimes these simple stories benefit certain actors because they turn a complex issue into an easy target. Something being an easy explanation doesn't make it true. Okay, now let's connect this back to you as the viewer. By the way, the first video in this series, Are We Wrong About Autism?, is a great foundation for this point. Because if we don't first talk about how autism gets misread, this increased topic can slide into unnecessary panic. Once you build that perspective there, you read the numbers here more calmly and more fairly. Alright, now I want one small thing from you. I'll leave you an easy comment format. What do you think is the strongest factor behind why autism looks like it's increasing? A. Expanding diagnostic criteria. B. Increased awareness and reduced stigma. C. More adult diagnoses. D. Something else, one sentence. I'm especially curious about the D answers, because the next video title will probably come from that. And now we're closing. If you made it this far, thank you, seriously. If this video loosens even one knot in your head, please like, subscribe, and share, so one more person chooses a better question instead of an easy answer. And if you turn on notifications, we'll keep going through the rest of this series with the same careful but clear approach. See you in the next video.